Hey, so I was wondering, what's your biggest phobia in life? Like there are a lot of phobias out there, hundreds of phobias, and if it's not something that's been invented yet, we'll give a name to a phobia, right? Just to identify what we're afraid of. But I was thinking about this just a couple weeks ago, like what is the thing that I'm afraid of more than anything else? And so I started reading some articles, and I came across this article that they listed the top 5 phobias for Americans in the year 2016. So last year, they listed at the end of the year the top 5 phobias for Americans in general, okay? So I thought I'd share those with you starting from number 5 all the way to number 1. If you can relate to it, cheer, yell, scream, boo, whatever, cry, because it is a phobia. So if you can relate, some of these you might be able to relate to. So number 5, top 5 phobias for Americans in 2016 is blood and or needles. Any of you guys can relate to that? I can definitely relate to that. Just the image of a needle being stuck in the arm, man, I do not like that. Blood on the ground, not a good sign. I am afraid of that, okay? Here's number 4, the top 5 phobias of Americans in 2016. Number 4 is drowning. Any of you guys have that phobia? A couple of you guys do, yeah. Some of you guys are crying now. Okay, number 3 is snakes and or spiders. How many of you guys are afraid of snakes and or spiders? Okay. Number 2, heights. How many of you guys are afraid of heights? Now, here's the interesting thing about heights. You really don't think about being afraid of heights until what? You're really high up, right? And most of us, this is about as high as you get throughout the week, okay? But when you get to, the top of Willis Tower or John Hancock, or you're standing on some top of, some roller coaster, and you look down and you say, whoa, I didn't realize how afraid I am of heights, And most of us, when we get really high up, that's when we realize, and it's too late, that we're afraid of heights. And the number 1 phobia of 2016 for Americans is public speaking. Public speaking. So I thought I'd just invite anybody up here to talk for 10 to 15 minutes. Anybody want to just get up here? Michael, come on up. You got 15 minutes. No, you probably would. You'd probably be able to spend 15 minutes up here. So I was thinking about this week, all these phobias that we have, but as a Christian, I think most of us would agree with this, that as a Christian, we would probably, that list would change a little bit, right? Everything would probably get bumped down a notch, and to make room at the top for this fear, the fear of sharing our faith with other people. I just think that's true for most of us. I mean, if we were really honest this morning, one of the most terrifying things for us to do in life is to share our faith, to talk about God or Jesus Christ or church with those around us, right? Our throats get a little bit dry, our stomachs get all knotted up, and I mean, we don't even know how to start a conversation sometimes. Somebody at work or a neighbor or a family someone that desperately needs to hear about the truth of God or Jesus Christ, and we don't even know how to start a conversation like that. Like, we don't even know what to say or how to say it, right? I mean, let's just be honest. I mean, most of us, we'd rather be stuck in a room with snakes and spiders than have to share our faith. It's just true. But yet, the core of Christianity, at the core of this Christian faith that we have, is this undeniable, unmistakable mission that Jesus Christ actually gave us. So we looked at it last week, Matthew chapter 28, verse 19. Jesus says, before he's about to leave to his closest of friends, those who follow him, he says, therefore, go. We talked about that last week, how that word go is so powerful. It's so meaningful. It's what gives us purpose. It's what gives you purpose in life. It's what gives us purpose as a church. It's what allows each and every one of us to be a part of something bigger than ourselves. It's the kingdom of God coming to planet Earth. Jesus says, therefore, go and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Just a couple days after that, right before he goes back up to heaven, Jesus is with his friends one last time, and he says, hey, here's the deal. I'm going to be gone, but I want you to be my witnesses in Jerusalem and Judea and Samaria and to the ends of the earth. These same guys remembered a conversation Jesus once had on a hillside where Jesus said, hey, listen, if you want to follow me, understand there are some things that come along with that. And one of those things is, as you follow me, guess what? You get to be the light of the world. That's who you are. In a dark world, when you follow me, when you claim to believe in me, you become the light of the world. I say all this to say that a life with Jesus was never intended to be private. Somewhere along the way in our American culture, we've looked at our faith and said, this is a private thing between me and God. But it was never intended to be that way. It was intended to go public on a regular basis, to be shared with others. Not because we're trying to convince or force another person to believe what we believe, but because, and here's the most important part, because we want others to experience what we've experienced in our faith in Jesus Christ, like purpose, forgiveness, love, truth, community. So here's the question. Here's the question that I wrestle with on a regular basis. The question that we need to wrestle with is, how do we spiritually engage people in our day, in our post-Christian culture, people who are somewhat anti-Christianity? How do we do that? How do we help people connect the dots between life and faith and Jesus? How do we do that without becoming judgmental, without coming across as spiritually arrogant or pushy? How do we help people discover what we ourselves have discovered in Jesus Christ? Well, that's what this series that we started last Sunday is all about. And I said last Sunday is you can take that word friend and switch it out from I have a family member who, or I have a neighbor who, or I have a co-worker who. Switch out all of those, any of those. And what we're doing is we're exploring and discovering these practical ways to share our faith with those around us, many of whom are disconnected from their Creator, the God of the universe, disconnected from faith in Jesus, disconnected from His church. And so last Sunday we started out and we looked at the qualities of a life that is seriously about bringing people and bringing others to Jesus Christ. We looked at these qualities, certain qualities that people have about bringing people to Jesus. And some of these qualities we talked about last week is you've got to care enough to get involved in people's lives. You got to take the time to get involved in the messiness of people's lives. You have to be willing to do whatever it takes to bring someone to Jesus. We talked about that last week. Now you might be sitting there saying, okay, wait a minute, Steve. I know that's all good, and I care enough to get involved, and man, I'll do whatever it takes to get them to Jesus Christ. But what if I have a friend or a family member, neighbor, coworker, whatever? What if I have a friend who is really turned off by religion? I mean, they don't seem religious at all. They want nothing to do with organized religion. They've been hurt by it in the past. They went to a church and the church disowned them or rejected them or condemned them or judged them unfairly, and they want nothing else to do with any kind of organized religion. Or maybe, they've heard all these reports about these corrupt religious leaders or hypocrisy within the church. Or maybe their perception of church and organized religion is just a bunch of rules. You know anybody like that? You have anyone in your life who is really turned off by organized religion? I mean, let's face it. Organized religion in America today is about as liked as Bill Cosby today. It's just true, right? I mean, we're very skeptical in our culture about organized religion. I mean, I've told you this before, but a response that I sometimes get when I sit down and start talking to someone about, faith in Jesus Christ, and I mention that I'm a pastor, and sometimes they will ask me, they will say, oh, you know what, that's sort of nice, but I'm not really into the whole religious thing. I get that quite often, actually. I'm not a religious person. I'm not into that religious stuff. Which I respond the same way every time. I'm not either. And it blows them away. They're like, wait, what? You're a pastor and you're not religious? That's right. I'm not a religious person either. And it totally catches them off guard. See, I think one of the problems you and I have in sharing our faith is we have a misunderstanding of the Christian faith. And so it makes it even more difficult for us to share our faith when we ourselves don't see Christianity the way it really should be viewed. So let's just start with this. I think we probably talked about this here at Journey, but I think it's so important, is Christianity is not a religion. That might surprise you. Okay, yes, technically it is a religion, okay? Technically it is a religion. It's considered one of the major world religions of the world, along with Islam and Buddhism and Judaism. It's one of the major religions of the world. In fact, Christianity right now on planet Earth is the most practiced religion in our world. And we talk about religion. Religion is simply a fancy word that we use to explain humanity's approach to God. That's what religion is. It's man-made. It's humanity, man and woman, saying, how do we get to this higher power on earth? How do we bring this supernatural power and this force? Most of us call him God, the God of the universe. How do we bring him and understand him to planet Earth? That's religion. It's our attempt. It's our approach to the God of the universe. But you see, the problem is when Jesus established his kingdom movement, he never intended it to be a religion. In fact, Jesus actually did the opposite. In his day, he did what he could to push back the religious establishment. Oftentimes, you would find him in the Bible challenging the religious leaders of his day. See, organized religion in the first century of Jesus' day was much like today. It was incredibly tainted. And it was causing all kinds of destruction in people's lives. And so Jesus, when he came to planet Earth, he wanted to help people discover a new approach to God. In fact, this is how I would describe it. His message is, listen, because of who I am and because of now that I'm now available to you, I think it's going to be important for you to rethink your strategy in life. That was Jesus' message. Listen, this is who I am. I am the Son of God. I am God here in flesh. And because now I am available to you, it probably is best that you begin to rethink your strategy for life. In fact, he would say certain things like this in Matthew chapter 11. That's the scripture that I want us to really look at today. In Matthew chapter 11, in verse 28, Jesus said this. He says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest." Jesus starts out this whole thing, and he says, "Come to me." Now, in the New Testament of the Bible, the life of Jesus, we find out that Jesus actually uses the word come or follow over 40 times. You see, Jesus was all about inviting people into a relationship with him, inviting people to be a part of his kingdom movement. See, Christianity, above everything else, is an invitation. It's not a belief system or a spiritual manifesto. Christianity is an invitation to enter into a life-giving relationship with the God of the universe through Jesus Christ. That's what Christianity is all about. And this is so important. Viewing Christianity as an invitation into a life-giving relationship as opposed to a religion makes it so much easier as you begin to share your faith with others. And here's the deal. We already know how to invite people to experience something that we've already experienced, right? We go to a great restaurant. We come home and we tell our friends or our neighbors or our family, hey, you got to go try this out. You need to experience what I experienced at this restaurant, the great food, the great service. We go see an incredible movie. One of the first things we do is we tell other people. We like, why? Because we believed in that movie. That movie was awesome. It moved us. It did something with us. And so we want others to experience the same joy and the same movement that we experience when we watch it. Sometimes we'll even invite someone to do it with us. You see, we're used to inviting other people to experience the things that we've experienced. When we have a good experience in life, whether it's a concert or a movie or an event or a party or something in life that is good, we go and we want others to experience that, right? And so we say, hey, why don't you come try this out? I think you're going to really like it. Inviting someone to experience what you've experienced is not only natural, it's easy. And the same can be said about our Christian faith. See, the Christian faith is simply an invitation for someone to experience what you've hopefully already experienced in your faith: forgiveness, love, hope, truth, purpose, community, acceptance. I believe one of the easiest and most effective ways to begin and generate a conversation about faith with someone else is simply to invite them to church. More specifically, invite them to Journey Church. I mean, we have been intentional here from the very beginning of our existence here at Journey Church is to remove all the religious obstacles out of the way so that people can come and experience the truth of Jesus Christ. When we have intentionally removed a lot of the religious things that might have kept you from coming to Jesus Christ here at Journey Church, we have intentionally, and we will always be a church that doesn't play the religious games. We're not here to play religion. And that's a good thing because so many people are turned off by religion. So many people lose their chance at discovering who Jesus Christ really is because of religion. And so here at Journey, we want to remove all the obstacles that might get in the way of that. That's why when I stand up here or when I do an email, when we talk about it from stage or when our leaders talk about, we're not shy from asking you to invite your friends and your neighbors and your coworkers and your family to Journey Church. There's power in a personal invite. Jesus understood this. That's why he didn't say, hey, I've got some unbelievable religious stuff that I want to share with you. No, he said, come, follow me. He invited people to experience something supernatural, something incredible, something that will change your life. And that's why on a regular basis, I get up here and say, we want you to be people who are inviting their friends, their neighbors, their coworkers, their family to church. It may just be the most important invitation you ever hand out. So here's a stretch challenge probably for most of us in this room, to begin to develop the spiritual habit of inviting. Develop the spiritual habit of inviting. Now, you may not have even thought of inviting someone to church or inviting someone to be a part of a faith movement as a spiritual habit or a spiritual practice, but it is. And like any habit that you want to develop in your life, you have to start doing it. If you want to get in shape, what's the first thing you got to do is you got to get to the gym. You got to eat right. You got to force yourself. Even though you don't want to get up at 6:30 in the morning to go to the gym, you do it. Why? Because you want to get in the habit of doing that. And over time, what happens is you actually, believe it or not, you actually look forward to getting up at 6:30 in the morning to go work out, right? Because now it's natural and you see the benefit of it. And I think we need to talk a little bit more about the spiritual practice and the spiritual habit of inviting others to be a part of church, to be a part of this Jesus movement. Jesus made it clear, that's what I want you to do. Develop the spiritual habit of inviting so that it becomes natural to you. At first, it will be hard, I promise you. It will be hard. If you've ever tried it, it will be difficult. The first time you say, hey, would you like to go to our church? I go to this church, and I'd love for you to be my guest. That's incredibly vulnerable, especially as an adult. But the more you do it, and every day you get up and it becomes a habit, it becomes a natural. You just look around and you look for opportunities. And when opportunities come, that's why we have at Journey Central right now, we have invite cards. And I want to encourage you to go out there today, even today, every week, grab some Journey invite cards. There's 4 different types. It doesn't have a whole lot of words on it. It meets people right where they're at, I think, and it has our website on it. Just go grab a couple of those and just begin to develop that habit of inviting others to be a part of something that you've already experienced. Now, you might be saying, well, you know what, Steve, I've done that. I asked my neighbor at Easter 2 years ago, and they said no. And you know what? I don't want to go through that again. I'm done. Really? You're going to give up that easily? They said no one time, and you're hands off the rest of their lives? And I'm not saying be obnoxious, okay? But don't give up on someone. Probably some of you in this room, your first time in church, you probably had been asked 100 times before you entered into a church building. Maybe you got a card from us and it was the 6th time you got something from us and you said, I'm going to try this church out. Listen, everyone doesn't automatically say, yes, I want to go to church. I'll go with you this Sunday. It takes people who are willing to say, you know what, I asked a year ago, I know, you said you had plans, but I think you'd really enjoy it. But Steve, you don't understand. I know my family member. They're never going to say yes. They're never going to step into a church building. No way. I'm not even going to ask them. I'm not even going to bother. Seriously? You're just going to say no for them? See, just like we talked about last week, is one of the things that keeps us from inviting and sharing our faith is we don't believe that God, the God of the universe, has the power to change people's hearts. We struggle with that. And so we pin people down and we think, oh, they would never come to church with me. They would say no all the time. We don't believe that God has the power to change people's lives and hearts, that they would say yes to an invitation. Well, Steve, everyone in my life, they're already Christians. Everyone I know, they go to church already. Seriously? Everyone you know goes to church. Now, if that's you, then you need to start finding some more friends. Because here's the deal. Jesus said you are the light of the world. If everyone in your life is a Christian and they're going to church, where are you being the light? I mean, that's why we find in the Bible, if you read through the stories of Jesus in the Bible, many times, as much as he was in the temple teaching and with the religious people, he was hanging out with sinners and people who needed him. Because Jesus said, I have to surround myself with people who need me. He said, listen, the well don't need the doctors. It's the sick who do. If everyone in your life is a Christian, they go to church, that's great. Go find some new people to be the light to. Jesus says, come to me. He says, come to me, all of you, and I love that phrase, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Everyone. Jesus is for everyone. His invitation is for everyone and anyone. Right? Even those people who don't look at all like Jesus Christ, that invitation to come and follow him is for everyone, because I've said this before, if Jesus isn't for everyone, then Jesus isn't for anyone. Jesus says, come, all of you who are weary and carry heavy burdens, and I will give you rest. Verse 29, he says, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I am humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. Jesus says, take my yoke upon you. What in the world is Jesus talking about? Take my yoke? What's that, an egg or something? Not yoke. Yoke. Now, in Jesus' day, that word yoke was pretty common. It was a pretty agricultural culture, and so they knew what yoke was. And some of you here probably know what yoke is. It was a wooden frame or harness, usually between two working animals to plow the fields or to carry loads. And they would take this yoke, which was this wooden frame, and they would usually harness it to the necks or the heads of these two working animals, usually oxen. And that would keep them straight so they could plow straight or carry some kind of heavy load. So everyone would have, in Jesus' day, understood what yoke was. But understand that Jesus wasn't necessarily referring to this type of yoke. That's not what he was referring to. You see, in his day, it was incredibly religious, a Jewish religious culture. And this word yoke that we get in the English language today actually had become a spiritual metaphor. It become a spiritual metaphor. Now, so let me just give you some context so we can really understand what Jesus is talking when he says, take my yoke upon you. Pre-Jesus, before Jesus entered the scene, the only way that God's people were able to relate to God was through his laws. So God originally gave the Big Ten Commandments. You shall have no other gods before me. Honor your father and mother. Remember the Sabbath day. You should not murder. You should not steal. You should not lie. And on and on and on. These were the original laws. And God's intent was to help his people relate to him. It was the only way that people could have a relationship with God was through his laws. It was the only way that people could understand who God was is through the laws that God gave them via Moses, their prophet. In fact, I've said this before, the laws of God in the Old Testament of the Bible was the spiritual lifeline to God. It was the way you knew God. So fast forward to the first century, this Jewish religious culture that Jesus was in, and you had these rabbis. They were the religious teachers of the day. And what these rabbis would do is their whole job would be to take the laws of God from the Old Testament of the Bible that connected people to him, and they would study it, they would research it, they would discuss it among themselves. What does this mean, and what does this look like for us today? And so what would happen is these rabbis would say, okay, this is what I think, this is what it looks like today, for us today. This is what God's law is lived out. This is what it looks like. So when the Bible says, remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy, a rabbi would come along and say, that's what this means. So you can walk a certain amount of feet on the Sabbath day, and that's not considered work. But any amount of steps beyond that would be considered work, and now you're breaking the Sabbath day. A rabbi actually had to interpret it that way. They would do this with every law and every rule that God ever had. They would put their own set of rules. They would attach and say, this is what we believe it means now. And so when people would go to a temple or they'd follow a rabbi, they were following a specific rabbi who had a specific set of interpretive laws or rules attached to God's laws. And these rules of a rabbi in Jesus' day was called a yoke. And so when you went to this temple or you followed this rabbi, it would mean they would say, hey, I'm taking up this rabbi's yoke. And so when Jesus comes along and he says, take my yoke upon you, it brings a whole different meaning to it. See, these yokes of these rabbis had quickly become just a set of extremely rigid, overly complicated list of religious do's and don'ts. In fact, if you were a Jew in the first century, more than likely if you were following a rabbi, not only did you have to follow God's laws, but you had to follow the rabbi's laws. And estimate, low end, probably about 600 rules that you would have to follow to be a good Jew. And so what was happening in Jesus' days, the heart and soul of God's laws had been hijacked. And what organized religion had begun to do is micromanage people's relationship with their God. So this is the religious scene that Jesus enters into. And so a clear distinction needed to be made between what Jesus was offering and what all the other religions were offering. And that's why Jesus says this. He says, take my yoke upon you. Let me teach you, because I'm humble and gentle at heart, and you will find rest for your souls. And then verse 30, he says, for my yoke is easy to bear. Literally the word delightful, joyful. It's joyful to follow me. Religion sucks all the joy out of following God. It's easy to bear, and the burden I give you is light compared to the heavy loads of religion. Basically, Jesus is essentially saying there's more to the spiritual life that you've been living, and it's found in me. Unfortunately, the religious obstacles that Jesus had to overcome in his day are the same religious obstacles that you and I have to overcome in our day to share our faith. I mean, I think our modern religion's approach to faith is much like those commercials, those drug commercials on TV. And they're all over the place, right? You sit down and watch a basketball game, and 2 of the 3 commercials are drug commercials. You guys know what I'm talking about, where you have a problem, they come on, they say, this is the drug that's going to fix your problem, right? And then the last half of the commercial, what do? They list all the side effects. They're going to cause headaches and swollen stomachs, and you're going to die, and all these horrible things. And I remember at the end of every single one of these commercials, I looked to the person next to me, whoever it is, I'm like, who wants that drug? All these bad things that could happen to you. And I think we approach the Christian faith, religion anyway, approaches the Christian faith in a very similar way. We say, hey, come try this religion now. It'll be good for your soul. But you have to dress a certain way. You have to look a certain way. You have to do this. You have to clean up before you can really discover religion. You have to be good. You have to do this. You can't do that. All these lists of things, of do's and don'ts you have to do in order to experience the good. Who gets excited about that? That's not me. I'm out. If I have to do all of that, that's where religion leads you. It's why so many people in our culture are disengaged with church and are turned off by religion, because it's not fulfilling. It doesn't give you purpose or meaning. See, when we begin to share our faith with others through the filter of a life-giving relationship with Jesus, other than a rule-producing religion, it will make all the difference in the world. And so here's my thoughts. When you begin to share your faith with whoever, personalize it. Personalize it. Don't talk in terms of religion about God. Talk in terms of a relationship with God. See, religion is cold and impersonal. It doesn't take into account where a person is in their life. It doesn't take into account the struggles that they're dealing with and the issues in their life. Because religion, whether we like it or not, is one size fits all. It's spirituality in a box. And while that might sound all nice and good, and that might sound easy, you just have the check marks, it's easy to follow, it's easy to know where you stand in religion, it's not fulfilling, it's not meaningful, it's not satisfying. It will always leave you wanting more. And so here's my thing is, I think you and we need to begin to shatter the stained glass ceiling of Christianity. It's not a religious thing. It's a relationship thing. It's not about a bunch of rules or do's and don'ts. It's about a personal relationship with the God of the universe. And it meets people right where they're at. And so when you go and you think about those 6 people in your life that we talked about last week, a family member who's so stubborn, but desperately needs God, a neighbor who is hurting deep inside, a co-worker who's lost and broken. When you think about those people, think, I want to meet them right where they're at, and I can do that with Jesus Christ. One of my all-time favorite verses in the Bible is in Hebrews chapter 10, and I want to end with this. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 19 through 22. Listen to what the writer of Hebrews talks about, the purpose and meaning behind the life of Jesus. He says, and so, dear brothers and sisters, we can boldly enter heaven's most holy place because of the blood of Jesus. By his death, Jesus opened a new and life-giving way through the curtain into the most holy place, because Jews in those days, they knew the temple and they knew the tabernacle, and you couldn't go into the most holy place. You had to get a priest to interact between you and God. There was always a person who was going on behalf to God. But now the writer of Hebrews says, you don't need anyone to get on your behalf to get to God, to intervene between you and God. Now you can approach the most holy place and have a relationship with your Creator through Jesus. Verse 21, and since we have a great high priest, Jesus, who rules over God's house, let us go right into the presence of God. I love that. Let us just, with confidence, go right into the presence of God with sincere hearts, fully trusting him. For our guilty consciences have been sprinkled with Christ's blood to make us clean, and our bodies have been washed with pure water. The writer of Hebrews says, listen, a life with Jesus removes the fear. A life with Jesus removes all the fear, and you can have confidence to approach the throne of God. It removes all fear, maybe not with your fear of snakes or blood or heights or needles, but with God, with your future, with your eternity, and with sharing your faith. Absolutely. Let's pray. God, we thank you. We come here every week and we look into your word. We come here many times lost and broken and hurting and confused and doubting. God, thank you for clarifying who you are. Thank you for clarifying the truth about your son, Jesus. God, we pray that even in our own lives that we would move away from religion and closer into a relationship with your son, Jesus. God, there are people in our lives right now, people we will see today who are far from you. God, you've made it very clear that this faith that we have in you, this faith that we have in your son, is not to be private. It's to be public. It's to be shared. May you give us boldness. May you put in our spirit and our soul a spirit of power, so that we can go out and we can invite people to be a part of something bigger than themselves, to experience love and forgiveness the way we've experienced it. God, may you open our eyes to people around us who desperately need to experience what your son has to offer. May today change our approach to sharing our faith with others. God, we love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name I pray.